Okay, hello viewers on YouTube, all 16 of you. Today I am here with Adam Spector of the DC Film Society and Liz Gray, who runs her great podcast. What's your podcast name again?
Archivist Bets on Sexy Witches or The Sexy Witches.
And Javier, who is a great admirer of classic film, is also our panelist. We're going to be talking about the year in review of 2022. Let's talk about some of the themes. Last year, in addition to the 10 Best Picture nominees, we had a tremendous number of films that I believe, if they were to be Best Picture nominees, it wouldn't have looked out of place. The three closest were Tick, Tick, Boom, House of Gucci, and Being the Ricardos. But in addition to that, you had Mass, you had The Last Duel, Last Night in Soho, you had The Lost Daughter, you had that film about Spencer, you had Green Book, you had Eyes of Tammy Bay, you had Hand of God, you had Pedro Almodovar had a year, you had Tragedy Macbeth, you had Card Counter, you had Cyrano, you had Pig, you had The Green Knight. I think that we might not have had that great abundance of films that could easily be Best Picture nominees this year, and we can debate that.
Yeah.
I think it's cyclical. I don't know if it's the decline of movies, but I think that but I think some of us have spoken that it was a little bit less of an exciting year. What do you guys think?
I agree on this. I saw a beautiful French film in April last year about this little girl that is played by real life twins. Like in the movie, she plays a little girl of a mom, and then she sees her mother as a 4-year-old in this old house where the mom used to live at, and they went to the grandmother's funeral. It was a beautiful fantasy film. I forgot the name of it, but it was a beautiful French film, and I don't like French films too much, but it was a very beautifully made tale, and I liked it. And also Elvis was amazing. Elvis, the movie, oh my God, that was spectacular. The way it was filmed and the acting and everything, recalling his life and everything.
So the question though is, are there a lot of films like the French film you saw or Elvis? And I think the question is whether a lot of films hit audiences or the country. I think there's always going to be great films at film festivals. There's always a film like Little Miss Sunshine, or that's a really small film that is able to get a wide release. I don't know if there was a lot of stuff. I think that you might look at that Nicolas Cage film, The Unbearable Weight of Talent, as one of those under the radar films. But is there enough films to fill the Best Picture field this year?
I don't think so in that sense. No, I think there were less in that sense.
Liz, what do you think?
Well, I mean, it depends on where you're looking. This year, with the exception of two huge movies at the box office this year, one of those would be Top Gun. Most of the success stories weren't the top 10 films. They were the independent films that were making their money back in the first weekend, or sometimes even outpacing some of the Marvel or DC comic movies in their opening weekend.
Let's get some examples going. What are those films?
Let's see. Underdog films nobody expected to do well in the theaters. The biggest one, the one that comes to mind, of course, was Terrifier 2, the mega slasher. It came out the same weekend as Black Adam did, and Black Adam actually underperformed, while this $250,000 slasher from New Jersey, made by indie people and basically chewing wire, gum chewing and wire and drumsticks. That was it. Nothing budget for practical effects, ends up making $10 million in 4 weeks. So, it was like that all over the place. Another movie, A24, the distribution company, had a great year. Their biggest win was Nope, which was, I'm sure we'll talk about in our top 10 segments. But they also made this little heartfelt, sincere one that did an amazing amount of money called Marcel, the Shell with Shoes on. That movie,
that was a big hit.
Yeah, it was a really big hit. No one expected it to be a big hit. I also mentioned to you, Orrin, how horror did well, outperformed itself this year. Overall, not just Terrifier 2, which was like a Cinderella story, but we had Smile, Barbarian. You want to talk about themes, mental illness and
We're not talking about
COVID.
themes yet.
Okay,
Sorry.
we'll talk about that later. But
I'm
I mean,
gonna be the like
a
mean
lot of
guy who
films
like
are
interrupts
similar.
people. Sorry, but it's all about keeping us on track and like making a great. I don't know. I'm
Well,
just a person.
you
I'm
said
so sorry
you
for
did
interrupting you.
mention themes. You said,
But
something
not yet.
about
Not yet. We're not there yet.
themes. No, well, you said okay.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so awful.
But I would just say none of those movies are going to be up for Oscar. Maybe Marcel with the Shell with Shoes On might squeak an animated feature nomination. I actually have a feeling it might. Matter of fact, there was 4 stop animation films in 2022, which is unheard of for 1 year. So it was not the mainstream big films making the money, with the exception of like Avatar and Top Gun, which made a lot of money. It was the middle to lower indie films that were rocking it at the box office this year.
Okay.
Okay.
I think I'm most interested here, I guess, is whatever films break through that I guess the average person on the street. I think we should have a 5th person in here who is like a guy who's very casual movie watcher and be like, have you heard of this film? And if not, maybe it's disqualified. Terrifier,
Well, I think
I haven't heard of, and that might be my fault, but I've always the philosophy that the film has to get to me. It has to get to my attention.
But
Like whether it's a commercial or something.
well,
Some people
I
disagree
think a
about
film,
that.
I think a film that did break through that we were talking about shortly before we started was Everything Everywhere All at Once.
absolutely, it
And
did.
it didn't, and I think that was also, Liz, going back to your point about A24 having a good year. I believe that
Great
was an
year.
A24 year
It was.
too.
It was.
So that was one where, you know, it was by the Daniels brothers, whose previous film was some people liked, but didn't get a major reaction, but this one did. And people, I think everyone who saw it was, or just was very enthusiastic about it. It did well financially compared to its budget. It also did critically very well, and I think you'll see it among the Oscar contenders as we move into 2023. I think that was a great example of like a movie, you know, like an old, in some ways an old school movie that real, you know, without, they had a lot of effects, but they were in, it was less on CGI and more on practical effects, but they were able to tell a compelling story and create not just a world, but many different worlds.
I had the most interesting experience with Everything Everywhere All at Once, where I watched it on a plane. And sometimes, like when I was in college and I was assigned a film, and I was not supposed to do this, like Sunset Boulevard, you should watch it and watch it for the enjoyment. But I was like, oh, wait, I'm supposed to take a quiz on Sunset Boulevard in an hour and a half. And I was just like fast forwarding through the film. Like I was my seatmate was interrupting me. The flight attendant was interrupting me. There was announcements of turbulence in the middle of this movie that really deserved way more attention than I was giving it. So I technically watched it, but I'm not sure. But I understand it's definitely a unique movie. But that's a tangent. But I think what's happening this year with the Best Picture field, my theory is that they simply don't have enough American audience kind of English language films that people can agree is great. So they're nominating some foreign films, RRR and Everything All at Once, and nominating some box office stuff, whether it's going to be Avatar or Top Gun, with an outside chance for Glass Onion and Wakanda, because I just think that it was a bad year for American movies. So they're going with foreign stuff.
Yes.
I think it's more that than this stuff is better, because I don't think that these movies might have necessarily usurped Power of the Dog, Coda, King Richard, Belfast, the slate that was there last year. Adam, I'll go to you. What do you think?
Well, I think it's hard to say whether it's because there weren't enough good American films. but you've seen the Oscars have more and more of a foreign film bent to them. You know, you look at a couple of years ago when Parasite won. It was the first foreign language film that won Best Picture. You look at the Academy membership, and they've been more and more each year trying to have more members that live outside the United States. So I agree that, you know, we'll probably see, you know, at least one, maybe a couple of foreign language films that are major players, but I don't think it's necessarily because American films weren't good enough. I agree with what everyone else is saying that it certainly wasn't the best year for American films. What we've had better years even in recent memory, but I wouldn't discount the foreign films just by saying, oh, it's because the American films weren't good enough. Foreign films in general are, you know, they're more available. People are watching them more. The voters are outside the U.S., so I think it's due to their quality that they're a part of this.
If
Okay, I want to make a slight correction. I don't know if this was. I think this is not the first foreign language film. The Last Emperor was directed by a man who made all his films in foreign languages, Bernardo Bertolucci, I think is his name.
Yes.
And the film was foreign language title, and it was filmed outside the United States. I think it might have been produced with American studio money.
But it was filmed outside the U.S. and it certainly had its share of foreign language, but I don't think it was still more often than not in English.
Can I add something to the reason why I think there's been a weakness in American releases?
Please, yes.
Well, if we go back, we track back 2 years, that's the height of COVID. So a lot of things were halted and stopped, and a lot of movies that have come out in this last year have all what I've been calling COVID related films, where you have 1, 2, or 3 people in them as the main characters at most. Not a lot of big tentpole films came out with large crowds and stuff. I think in a year, because it's always about a 2-year cycle from when something's greenlit to when something gets distribution. And we're hitting that number now. That Emma Thompson movie is a good example of that. Was it Good Luck to You, Leo Grand? I had to look up the name of it, which is basically her in a room with a gigolo. It's actually one of the best films of the year. There was a small indie horror film called Hellbender, which is basically a family in a trailer shooting a movie on a road, literally on a road trip. You saw a lot of that this year. Like that's why I think the smaller films are prevailing, because bigger films, you know, the indie films can afford to do movies with only 1 or 2 people in them. So
I think that I would agree with that theory. And we also have the phenomenal that Guillermo del Toro and Martin Scorsese both said in brilliant op-eds that I agree with, as well as Francis Ford Coppola, that movies are dying at the expense of Marvel, except for the fact that 2021, I was going to pronounce the death sentence of movies, except that 2021 was a year where a lot of stuff happened. So I'm not sure where we are in relationship to the pandemic. I think it's just a bit cyclical. I'll bet 2023 is a better year. Javier, what do you want to say? I have a feeling that you want to add something.
Yes. Yes, I wanted to add that that it wasn't a good year in a way, but I just saw Babylon. That was an amazing movie about the silent era in Hollywood. A lot of excess, which I won't spill the beans on, but a lot of excess of debauchery and all that was going on back there in Hollywood. But it was an excellent film. I just read that it hasn't recouped its investment money, the production money, because it's sort of like a flop, unfortunately. It was I think $180 million was spent to make it, and it's only earned about 10. So it's like I have a feeling it won't attract an audience because it's a little bit of an esoteric topic about silent film Hollywood, and most people maybe wouldn't relate, unfortunately. And it's a great film, though. And Meg LaSalle from the San Francisco Chronicle said that it was very ambitious. You can tell that the director loves Hollywood history because it was very detailed about all that was going on with the 4 cases of the John Gilbert character that Brad Pitt's playing and the Margot Robbie character and other 2 people in there. So it's a shame, but it was an experiment that I'm glad they made it, because it's rarely, some of those are rarely talked about in contemporary times. So that's my opinion of that. Yeah.
Okay, so let's kind of move on to another theme. We have a growth in the genre of like autobiographical movies. It started, for me, I feel like it started with Roma, and by this I mean auteurs using some of their capital, some of their like cultural capital, their political clout to be like, my passion project is me talking about myself. It started with Roma, then we had Paul Thomas Anderson and Quentin Tarantino with Licorice Pizza and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, reflecting on their childhood and hybridizing with current events of the time. Then we had Pedro Almodovar with Love and Glory, although he's made a career out of being autobiographical, but Plain and Glory was a very kind of a very poignant movie. Then last year we had Belfast, and now we have Bardo, Armageddon Time, and The Fabelmans. What is behind this trend? Are you enjoying this trend? Let's start with Javier.
Could you repeat the question again, Orrin?
What do you think might be behind this sort of idea of auteurs being successful in the sort of like this autobiographical? I think that we can definitely say that it's definitely very much a genre. It's definitely that these movies are all very much in the same cloth.
Oh, you mean like the
Armageddon Time, Bardo, Belfast.
Oh
Roma,
yeah, Belfast was very
Fabelmans.
beautiful. Yeah, it's very autobiographical. I didn't know that Kenneth Branagh was from Northern Ireland. I had no idea when I saw that movie. It was based on his life as a growing up in that era, and also what there's a touch of that every year with some director. Not every couple of years, and a director touching on his life like that. Like Spielberg did it now with Fabelmans, that is based on his life growing up as a child of loving movies. And so yeah, it's like I think those are the 2 main ones. For Roma too, but that's it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have a theory that maybe it's a counterpoint to the idea of we talk about we're saying like people of color, you tell your own story, and so a lot of people like Barry Jenkins and Dee Rees are telling very personal stories. I'm not sure if I've seen any like the Southeast Asian filmmakers. I don't think Crazy Rich Asian was very autobiographical, or but and I think maybe it's like this is a very well socially sanctioned space for white filmmakers to do, is to sort of like Armageddon Time was, I think, a very poignant film about racism, but it also was very appropriate in the way it talked about, because it's like how does a white character react to it, to witness it? Does it shape his life to see that injustice? So I think it's kind of a counterpoint to sort of more voices, to more voices being very personal with their stories. Adam, what do you think?
I mean, I think there's history of directors making somewhat autobiographical films. Spike Lee with Crooklyn, Woody Allen with Radio Days, Fellini with 8.5. Why we have so many coming at the same time? I don't know. I think part of it is some of these directors get older. They've done the films that have made money, and the old one for them, one for you. So this is the one for themselves.
I want to comment on that, but I want to ask if Liz has anything to contribute. In the meantime, I think these films are maybe I'm enjoying these films better than 8.5. Or another example is All That Jazz, which we've discussed about Bob Fosse, in the sense that some of those films are a bit more about me. Like All That Jazz and 8.5 is about me and as a creative god and my creative process. And these films are about my childhood and my life, I think. And I think I'm very my favorite. I admire Bob Fosse, but I've never once cared about like your creative. I've never once cared about like the man behind the man, unless he can find a way to make it interesting. I think James Gray and Alfonso Cuarón and Steven Spielberg found ways to make their stories interesting, and it was like, I'm telling an interesting story first. I know that who's seen 8.5 or All That Jazz? Raise your hand.
I have not seen them yet. No.
Okay, so Liz, why don't we hear from you? What do you think? Have you seen The Fabelmans, Liz? Liz is muted. Adam?
Yes, yes, I saw the Fablemans, really enjoyed it. I mean, I was pretty familiar with Steven Spielberg's biography, so that added to it, knowing how much he was drawing on his own history and seeing a little bit about where his love of movies came from, but also about how that tied to his tumultuous family life. I thought he brought it all together very well.
I wasn't muted. Can you hear me
Oh,
now?
I'm so sorry, but so what I was saying is, I think these films are more about telling a good story and exploring my childhood than I'm a creative genius, see what I'm all about, which I thought like 8.5 and All That Jazz both bored me to death, which I thought these films are better. Do you think these films are better? Or do you like the old classics, the sort of like All That Jazz or 8.5 or whatever?
I
Can
was
I-
never into Fosse, so I never liked
Can-
All That Jazz either. So
Can
did
I actually
like
answer the question I've been asked twice and cut off? And
Yes,
yeah,
sorry.
okay.
Yes.
First of all, no, I have not seen Fableman, so it's been on my list. I think it's more about telling what you know. Once again, that people were stuck at home, and I'm sure was a lot of reflection. There was a 2-hour special last year that was written by Bo Burnham, the comedian, called Inside, which was about like just living with yourself by yourself for a year. But you were talking about biopics and telling what you know. 2017 started this trend with The Big Sick. I don't know if you remember that, which is a true story about the comedian who plays a version of himself when he fell in love with his wife, and his wife
It's
was
one
in
of
a
my favorites
coma.
of that year.
It's
Yes.
a fantastic movie, and I really think that kind of started this trend. So once again, I still think it's somewhat a reflection of COVID when it comes to the Fablemans and Steven Spielberg. I think he's earned the right to do a movie about self-reflection, considering how much he's given the world. Sometimes you have to sort your stuff out, and that's a good way to do it, is to write it into a screenplay. So it's one of those trends that may or may not last, but I've been enjoying the films. I think there's room for both. I think there's room both for the big spectacle pageant versions of them back in the old days, and I think there's room for intimate stories, and people tend to like the intimate stories. The big spectacle films, with a few exceptions, have been underperforming in the theaters. People want to know more personal stories right now.
I think it also raises an interesting question of the fact that Steven Spielberg's life story is slightly more of an inside story involving the audience. We could see the references to Raiders of the Lost Ark, or rather The Last Crusade, in the New Mexico desert and E.T., whereas James Gray, I found that film just as good, if not slightly better, Armageddon Time, and I have never once spent more than 10 seconds thinking about who the hell James Gray is. I've enjoyed a couple of his movies, but it's interesting because I don't think it's a prerequisite to sort of be a public figure to sort of make one of these. Adam, what do you think?
No, I don't think you have to be a public figure. If your background is an interesting story, then I mean, Spike Lee, just go back to him. he was making stories about his background before anyone knew who he was. Have someone like Spielberg, whose life is pretty well known, I think it resonates that much more. I found Armageddon Time a little underwhelming. He kind of raises these questions, and that it ends on a note that to me felt a little bit flat.
I see. I want to ask a fun question now, which is if you could pick a filmmaker that you were going to greenlight their life story, their sort of, at least their childhood story or their pre-fame story, who would you pick? Who wants to take this first? I can give you my, Javier, go for it.
You mean, are you a contemporary director or someone from the past?
I think it could be both. Yeah, even if they're dead, you could pretend that you're go back in time as a 1950s studio executive. Although I don't think that.
No, not an executive, a director. I don't want to do it. A director.
No, but you could be the studio executive greenlighting it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. A person that would be interesting to find out about would be somebody that most people don't know about. Henry King is somebody that directed musicals at Fox and dramas. He did Love Is a Many Splendor Thing, and but it wouldn't be an audience favorite. The people wouldn't be interested in it, but it would be an interesting way to find out what made him tick. He directed Lillian Gish. He directed Jennifer Jones. He directed Tyrone Power, Maureen O'Hara. Directed Ronald Coleman, Janet Gaynor, Will Rogers, and all these people. He's very relatively unknown by the public. He died at the age of 94 in 1982, so he lived until the 80s, but he had retired in the 60s. And like, that would be interesting. Also, William Wyler, somebody more acclaimed that maybe might get an box office thing. William Wyler, his story, how he from Universal Studios to then becoming a world-class director within 10 years of being in Hollywood. That was just unheard of rise like that through Samuel Goldwyn's company. It's like that's sort of a meteoric rise that was unexpected. Because usually people at Universal never left the studio or anything, but he did. He was one of the few that was able to leave that studio behind and go into other studios and reach more heights. So that would be an interesting story as well. Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna pick. That's interesting. William Wyler has won 3 Oscars, which is almost the most. I think he's like number 2, and he's.
Yes.
But his filmography is so diverse that people don't attach him to a single style, which I think has made him less famous. So that would be interesting. My pick, I would say, is Robert Rodriguez, known for Sin City, Spy Kids, and Once Upon a Time in Mexico, which is the tail end of a trilogy that started with El Mariachi, which was made when Mexico didn't really have the Three Amigos. So it really had. I would love to know, if you were growing up in Mexico and dreamed of being a director, did you really think that the Mexican film industry would accommodate that? I know that he was a lab rat for pharmaceuticals to fund El Mariachi, which is, I don't know if anyone's seen it, but it's a really wonderful low budget film. So Adam, did you see that or?
Yeah, I saw El Mariachi. I thought it was a terrific film. And you're right, the story about how it was made could be a film in and of itself.
And I think another one might be Terry Gilliam. I mean, I guess because you could learn a little about the Monty Python and they would be entertaining, and he's the only non-British person in the troupe, so I'm not sure how he did that. And he has a vivid imagination, so I'm kind of curious to know, was he detached from his peers? Was he well liked by, like, I heard he was like backpacking through Europe when he just chanced upon meeting Monty Python. I have no, seems like it has an interesting history.
Yeah, that would be an interesting film to make. Actually, that would be a perfect candidate for a film. I would actually greenlight that.
All right. What about you, Liz? Who would you want to see a biopic of?
First, I want to mention that there is a fantastic documentary about Robert Rodriguez's creative process called Full Tilt Boogie, which was people on the ground zero when he was filming From Dusk Till Dawn with George Clooney. And it talks about all levels of filmmaking, including the people that hold the boom mics and production assistants. So, highly recommend it if you want to see about Robert Rodriguez in a great documentary about filmmaking. But for me, I've always had this dream that someone would someday adapt Bruce Campbell's book, If Chins Could Kill, the story of a B-movie actor, because it's not really just about him. It's an semi-autobiographical book that it actually is an autobiographical book he wrote, but it's actually really about his relationship with Sam Raimi and their filmmaking together, especially their early years when they were doing the early Evil Dead before Sam Raimi became, Doctor Strange and, of the multiverse. So I think that would be a really good movie, actually, to see his rise to power.
Bruce Campbell spoke at my college, and he drew quite a crowd. And I was like, didn't he just have a few lines in Spider-Man? And it was
he's
certainly been
my
very
boy.
charming on Burn Notice and a number of other projects. And I think it would be interesting because sometimes you have these unique love stories with it's almost like pseudo romantic between an actor and a director who get each other. Like Antonio Banderas and Pedro Almodovar are really great one's the muse for the director, or Penelope Cruz and Pedro Almodovar, and that relationship could be central to a story. What about you, Adam? What director do you want to see get their own early childhood in a movie?
Yeah, I think classic era, I would go with John Huston, just given his, he was a son of a famous actor and he traveled the world even before he became a famous director. And then he filmed, he was on the ground in World War II. And then his kind of checkered love life later. For a modern director, I'd go with Scorsese. He's touched on his life in various films. He's never done a purely autobiographical film, and I think with him, his life in Little Italy, um, his asthma that shut him in, which kind of triggered his love of movies because that's what he had to do, and then into his adult life, his struggles with substance abuse. I think that would be an interesting film.
I might not watch that film. I think that if he had an interesting childhood, it would have worked his way into moviedom by now. I mean, or he would have. I don't know. He's really. I think he's already personal enough, and so therefore, I don't know. I assume that we would have seen some personal touch of him. I think he's really interesting when he talks about other people's movies, and that's the thing I love. And when he borrows from other people's movies to make his own movies. So I'm not sure, but it's hard to say. I mean, it's hard to say. I don't know how that would look. If you were presenting this to me, I might say, can you draft it out a bit more? But it's hard. What about so another theme I think is that there are a number of movies that I think borrow from like the rules of the game or the Grand Hotel kind of template, which is films talking about class. We had The Glass Onion, we had The Menu, we had Death on the Nile, and we had Triangle of Sadness, which I really did enjoy quite a bit. Each of these had some strengths. Not all of them was about the differences between have and have nots, because some of them, the casts were made entirely of rich people. But I'm just curious, what people think of this trend. Who wants to go first? Adam?
Well, yeah, I think it's hard to say for sure because these films were greenlit years ago, but certainly I think it kind of touched a nerve because people are kind of tired of hearing about Elon Musk. No one knows really why he bought Twitter, and that seems to have failed spectacularly, or Jeff Bezos, or some of these other people. There's a lot of focus on wealth inequality. So I think these films coming out they're touching on these themes, some more than others, really kind of spoke to people and because it reflected what was going on.
I agree, and as I said, I think that the sort of template for this, I think, is like that Jean Renoir film Rules of the Game. It's, I hope other people have seen it. I know that it's, or like the upstairs downstairs, like, Gosford Park or whatever, maybe Downtown Abbey, which I think White Lotus on TV also does this a lot, where you contrast haves and have-nots. I think Glass Onion was mostly interested in satirizing the haves. They didn't really. I think Death on the Nile. I don't even think that Hercule Poirot is the contrast to the rich. I just think he's the guy who's cleaning up the rich's mess. But there wasn't really. I think it's sort of a meaner, like, let's really, really make fun of the rich approach. Triangle of Sadness did have, which I think was the most effective of them all, did have the requisite lower class characters to provide the contrast.
I wish I had seen that one. That was actually on my list. It still is to see before my countdown. This Triangle Soundness. The menu is just straight up old school. Eat the rich.
Yeah.
And it's not really wearing its subtlety on its sleeve. It's not being subtle at all. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I think hard hitting is a way to describe these four films. I'm not as familiar with Agatha Christie as I wish, I was, but I think that the source material is also designed to be very class conscious. Is that accurate from anyone who's ever read Murder on the Orient Express, which was one of my favorite films of the 70s, or Death on the Nile?
Yes, it's a beautiful film. I saw it with Betty Davis and Maggie Smith, and I saw the remake with
Josh Gad and Leslie Odom.
Yes, and Armie Hammer.
He's not in the remake of Murder on the Orient Express. He's in the remake of Death on the Nile.
Oh, sorry, yeah, Death on the Nile, right.
What are the themes? I noticed that one wasn't as successful as the other three. I wonder if it's because it wasn't as vicious at attacking the rich as the other three. I also think it came out in January, so maybe it's just forgotten in memory a bit.
Yeah, I would say, I think March or February was released. Yeah, I think it's been forgotten by the memory because of the year passing. Yes, but it was good, but I didn't see the other two, but maybe because it was less stinging criticism, it didn't make a lot at the box office.
Yeah, and Adam, you do mention that some of these films, they have a lot of they're greenlit a bit earlier and they're resonating now. And I think you're absolutely right that I think Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are making the news. Personally, full disclosure, I work at Amazon, and I think that me and my workers at my Virginia site are treated far better than like the locations in Alabama where I think the bad news originated from about Amazon, but there's who knows. But I think what's also interesting is that race has been in the news a lot, and as far as I think, I personally have been fairly well publicized that there's probably an overemphasis on racial divisions when discussing America. So for me, it's been really refreshing to see a lot of this TV and stuff really focus more on class. At the same time, I'm a little puzzled that we're talking about class so much now. It seems like the right time to have done it was like 2015 when The Big Short came out.
There was actually a good film about racism. That it didn't get a wide distribution. I think it was more meant as educational, but I saw it early in the year. It's like it's called A Chronicle of Racism in America. So I'd recommend that.
I'm sure that there are films that I think every year, and and that's not a bad thing. That's probably a good thing. There are always going to be films that talk about the Black narrative. Devotion and Till this year are those films, and there's probably also a few others on a lower level. I think there's also the question of, are we ever gonna see that visibility with some of the other populations? we haven't really seen Native American, too many Native American or Hispanic American movies or Pacific Islander movies. We've seen Reservation Dogs on TV. We've seen Wind River, the Taylor Sheridan film, but I'm curious to see when those things kind of a really great Native American movie hits the big screen.
Well, I mean, Prey came out this year.
Which one?
Prey, the Predator movie, which took place in pre-colonial America and was a native language spoken movie.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I'd have to look up the box office on this.
it was a Hulu release, and it was released in the theaters too. But you can Prey is one of the top 10 films of the year in a lot of people's lists, and it's PREY, not AY.
Did it thank you for alerting us to this film. Did it kind of highlight a lot of Native American, was it kind of like a like a Mudbound or a Till kind of, where like talked about a lot of inequality, or was it was just set in a Native American community?
It's set in Native American time period, but that's what made it kind of refreshing. It kind of reminded me if a Disney princess could murder people and had to fight an alien monster.
All right. So I guess we also kind of had a few biopics this year. Music biopics. Elvis. My understanding is there was a David Bowie movie this year.
Yeah, that was a documentary.
Oh, Moon Sun or something. And I thought that was also a Weird Al film.
The Weird Al film was fantastic, by the way.
I'm sure it would be. I didn't know where it was playing.
It's free on Roku. If you have a Roku device, you can walk it on the Roku channel right now.
I might, and I think there was a fourth. Whitney Houston, I Want to Dance with Somebody. This is on the heels of Bohemian Rhapsody, Rocket Man. Is there anywhere to go with this genre other than just kind of depicting a guy, a rock star or a music? Oh, also Aretha Franklin, Respect, I think came out maybe last year. Something with Jennifer Hudson. I can't remember what it was. Is there anywhere to go with this genre?
That was a 21.
Yeah, is there anywhere to go with this genre that hasn't already been explored? It seems like all of these things have four things in common. A lot of these people have parental issues, like Ray, Walk the Line, Bohemian Rhapsody. They have uneasy relationships with fame. They have sexual temptation, and they have drugs.
Well, that's what makes the Weird Al Yankovic movie so amazing, because it really isn't a true biopic. It is a parody of other people's biopics, and it is absolutely hysterical and really, really funny. And I would answer that that answer for you about biopics, it remains to be seen, because next year's only big major release that's not a sequel or a reboot or some part of a franchise is Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. So we'll see what that one does next year.
Is it no? I was actually asking about musicians. Is it a musician Oppenheimer?
No, it's a biopic. No, it's a biopic.
Yeah, so I'm talking about the music biopic.
Music biopics have been stale forever. That's what I mean.
Ever since
the best.
Ever since Walk Hard came out, I think it was the middle of last decade with John C. Reilly. That so effectively skewered the traditional biopic that after that,
the music biopic.
It almost seemed pointless. I think a music biopic, if I were advising someone, should focus on a particular section of the person's life, rather than trying to do the whole thing. That's what you ran into with the Whitney Houston biopic. They're just rushing through so many different things in her life that you never really had a chance to get to know her.
But Adam, I think that even if Walk Hard showed how stale the genre was, they're still going to make it. It's kind of an easy, because you can make money off the soundtrack, and I think that is a good. segue to, I know that Javier, you said one of your favorite films is Elvis, and I think it's absolutely important to ask if Elvis sort of broke through the mold, if it was a unique film or if it was just kind of a typical film about a great guy. And I don't doubt that Elvis was an awesome, amazing figure in pop culture and a great force for, you know, except for his wife, but most of the people around him. But was the movie enough to be not a typical biopic? Javier, why don't you make the case? Because I know you love the movie.
Could you repeat the movie about that last thing about the movie that you're referring to?
Is Elvis more than a
Elvis,
typical
yes, Elvis
biopic?
it's a beautiful biopic by Baz Luhrmann. It was like it was extraordinary the way he filmed earlier Elvis's childhood, and then he jumped into his adulthood, into the Ed Sullivan years. It was very well made. He was very expressionistic about the whole thing, very dramatic, and it was an excellent tale. It actually gives you an idea of Elvis's life without, like, he did it visually so well that you don't you feel like you want to know more about his life and everything like that. And it was very well made. He became it was sort of like if it was a biography of him in a book and he turned into a movie, essentially. And that's how I felt it was. Yeah.
But I expect a biopic to be more than a book turned into a movie, because I could just read the book.
Okay.
I don't want to just learn about a guy's life.
Yes.
So I mean, I know that Baz Luhrmann clearly has a distinctive visual style. I mean, he kind of turned to animation a little bit when drawing comic books. He, you know, framed the concerts a certain way. I'm not sure if it added up to more than the sum of its parts. I know that it was one of 3 or 4 films from the first half of the year that sort of broke into the Oscar conversation. But I think biopics have a way of automatically doing that. Music biopics, rather, have an automatic way of doing it. Liz or Adam, did you see Elvis, and what did you think?
I'm not a Baz Luhrmann fan. I try to like his movies, but I have issues with them. So I have not seen Elvis yet. That being said, I am very surprised how well it did in the theaters, because it actually was one of the sleeper hits of the year. And I know people that went to see it multiple times.
Yeah, I think Baz Luhrmann's style fit who Elvis was as a performer very well, and that helped it rise above the traditional music biopic that Walk Hard skewered so effectively. You had a little bit more there. Also it had the relationship with Colonel Parker and all that entailed. So I don't know if Elvis is one of my favorite films of the year, but I certainly enjoyed it.
That was one, honestly, I come down hard. That was one of the dumbest things about the whole movie. The film couldn't decide whether Parker was a villain or not. Parker and his voiceover talked with sincerity. It only came up in the last half hour of the 2 hour that Colonel Parker might be a bad guy. There was no foreshadowing to it. And then they had I did not even see him as bad at all. And then they had the end credits said Colonel Parker did this bad thing. And I'm like, I don't know if Tom Hanks even knew that was the way to play the guy.
I disagree. I think it showed him as pretty rotten from the get-go.
Isn't that what talent scouts do? Is you're supposed to go to a guy and discover them? And, you know, I think that he did his job. Show him embezzling, then you can say he's an embezzler. Okay.
Well, look, we could have a whole thing on that. So
yes,
I
we
don't
should
want to go
really
that
get
down
into the
that
tax
hole.
returns of Colonel Parker with a. I will say, okay, so we don't have. I feel like we might be running over a little bit to do top tens. What are some great films that we haven't mentioned? If we want to do that really quick, you know. Adam, what?
One of my, yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Adam.
One of my favorites that we haven't talked about is Emily the Criminal, and I think it have a terrific lead performance from Aubrey Plaza. It really captured a lot of the what kind of the dark side of what a lot of millennials are facing. And also, it surprised me. It went into some different and more interesting directions than I expected. So that's one that I hope people continue to discover.
Wow. Yeah, you told me that was your number one film. I was like, are you serious? Like, that's like my number like 25 film out of like 35. But that's good. Let's have a big discussion. Let's go.
I don't know.
Let's go round for round. No, I'm just kidding. It's 24 out of 39. But it's actually not a bad film at all. I guess I just didn't expect that it could have that high of a ceiling in terms of the emotional impact of the viewer, since it's very low budget and very focused on action and traditional tropes. I didn't know anyone could walk out of that theater saying, this is an amazing, profound movie. But more power to you if you're able to see such depth in a movie. There's nothing technically wrong about it, in my opinion. This was an odd reception to Top Gun. I did not expect Top Gun to be this well loved, but I love the movie. But I did not think people would come around to loving it. Top Gun is a movie. I love it. I think it might be my favorite of the year, or my second favorite of the year. I felt very emotionally, such catharsis. I do think that I couldn't give anyone points for acting in the film. And I think that's the way it's supposed to be. But the idea of like, this is a great acting performance by anyone? No, not really. The days of Tom Cruise being a great actor, like Collateral, I think are behind us. I think he's just more interested in being an action star. And he action stars the hell out of the film. But I think let's talk about Top Gun. What are your reactions to it?
I didn't see it, so I can't give an opinion.
Did you guys see Top Gun? Someone had to see Top Gun.
No,
Yeah.
I didn't.
Wow. Well, what do you recommend? This was also the year of Batman. That was interesting.
I did see Batman.
That was a very... Yeah, that was, let's see. I also... Well, what did you think of... Well, actually, let's table Batman for a bit later. Or rather, because we're talking about best film, so let's talk about what you thought was a best film. Let's do maybe a couple more rounds of really good films. I also liked Where the Crawdads Sing, Triangle of Sadness, and Deep Water, and Amsterdam, and Woman Talking. But that rounds up my top 10, I guess. What might also be on your list of great films?
Adam, do you want to go?
No, I was thinking.
Well,
Go ahead, Adam.
yeah, I was just going back to Top Gun, which I did see. I wasn't expecting much because I thought the first one was okay, but nothing special. But I think people really appreciated how hard it went, how hard they tried to produce authentic aerial scenes, that people are used to just so much CGI that here, when you had, no, they're really in the planes, they're really doing all of this, that people just, embraced it as kind of a throwback to, to action films they may have grown up with. I don't know if that's in my top 10, but I certainly enjoyed it a lot. I'd recommend it to anyone.
What else is in your top 10 then? With a break for Liz, what else you got for us that's a really special treat this year? We know you don't want to reveal it until your podcast on Wednesday, which I will promote on the bottom of this. But what else is in your top 10, Liz?
Well, I don't mind talking about what's on my top 10, or will be making my top 10 for sure. Everything Everywhere All at Once is definitely in the top 5 of my list. Nope we have to talk about Nope. Nope. You're talking about autobiographical movies that are obvious. It's clearly a change for Jordan Peele because he went away, even though there is social commentary still in there, it's a lot of it is introflexion about the obsession with cameras that our world has. And on top of it is just a badass monster movie and has one of the best kills of the year. Like absolutely one of the most shocking things I'd seen. And I was sick as a dog when I saw it. And when that moment happened, I stood straight up and go, well, you don't see that every day. My favorite film of the year so far, and nothing has beaten it. It's not for everyone. It was Phil Tippett, who was the animated, he did the special effects for Jurassic Park and a bunch of stop animation in the 80s, did a film that he started working on in 1987. And now, 40 years later, he has made a movie called Mad God, which is a stop animation film. It had a very limited theatrical release. If you see Shudder, it's playing there, and it is literally like a descent into hell. It is absolutely beautiful. If you're into filmmaking and if you're into animation in particular, do not miss this movie. I was very pleased that there were 4 stop animation films. I'm an old school Harryhausen girl and Willis O'Brien, so I love those old school stop animation movies. That we had 4 movies this year that ranged from Mad God to Marcel with the Shell with Shoes, which is heartwarming reflection on life. I was very excited to see people were pushing their boundaries in ways that you would not expect filmmakers to do. And that includes Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, which is extremely disturbing, by the way. I was scarred by that movie.
Right.
All right. I should mention there are 2 on my top 10 list that haven't been discussed so much yesterday. I would talk about Woman Talking, but duh, everyone knows that one's out there. It's good. Deep Water is by Adrian Lyne, who did Fatal Attraction and is really good with tension. This is a film that's really wonderfully strange. It's about a married couple in which the wife gets off on cheating with her husband with guys half his age, and the husband gets off on murdering them. And both of these things are open secrets, but they're never explicitly mentioned. And there are just a lot of really interesting details, and it's a very out there movie. Also, I really enjoyed The Bubble. It's always good to, it is a comedy by Judd Apatow that really kind of captures the zeitgeist of being locked up during the pandemic. It has one of those endings that reminds me of Doctor Strangelove or like Blazing Saddles, where everything just kind of really goes, just kind of like breaks the fourth wall and kind of just goes ridiculously nonsensical. And it has some, like, Karen Gillan and Pedro Pascal play some great comic characters. Adam, are there any films that you want to highlight that haven't been discussed yet?
I think a film that I really liked was called The Inspection with Jeremy Pope. He played a young gay kid who comes out of the inner city and who wants to be in the Marines. And kind of, so it's part of it is like, the basic training that anyone would experience, but this was still in the don't ask, don't tell era. So it's also him dealing with that secret, and he really hasn't, and trying to reconcile with who he is in the military world. So I don't know if that's going to be on my top 10 list or not, but it's definitely one I'd recommend.
Okay. I have a little surprise for you. Hold on a sec. I have one little game before we go, because I know that Javier has to go to bed early. I'm going to stop it. First, I want to thank you so much, everyone, for being part of this. And we will promote all of your stuff at the bottom, including Javier's. Doesn't have a project in the works other than just being a film lover. So I will promote